On this Wednesday night, Alberta's COVID crisis and political turmoil. As healthcare workers work to save lives, the Premier fights for his political future.
The voices calling for Jason Kenney's resignation are growing.
Is a leadership review coming? Ontario's vaccine passports are now in effect. The system crash and the criticism.
What I'm asking this Premier to do is fix the holes in his vaccine certificate program.
Not guilty on all 38 charges. The reasons for the verdict in the case of an Ottawa bus driver and a deadly crash. And he towers over everyone.
I just love it.
The Canadian boy who is the world's tallest teenager.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin tonight in Alberta, where the pandemic is raging and the Premier is fighting for his political future. Jason Kenney, widely criticized for his handling of the pandemic, is taking heat from all sides, including within his own party. Leadership did come up during a caucus meeting today, though there was no vote of confidence on Kenney's leadership. This is what Alberta's hospitals are grappling with. ICUs are filled with COVID-19 patients, and exhausted staff are struggling to keep up. There are now more than 1,000 Albertans with COVID-19 in the hospital. Most non-urgent surgeries have been postponed, and more ICU beds have been added to help keep up. Without those extra beds, the province says its ICUs would be at 174% capacity. Alberta reported 20 more deaths from COVID-19 today. One of them was an 18-year-old, the youngest Albertan to die from the virus. Heather Yourex-West has our top story tonight on the pandemic and the political turmoil, and fears a change in leadership now might actually make things worse.
Alberta's intensive care units have never seen so many patients or so much death.
Breathing just isn't where we want it to be, okay? Is there anyone that we need to call?
In this video, taken last week at Calgary's Peter Lougheed Centre, another patient is intubated. There are now more than 300 patients in ICUs across Alberta. The normal number of beds is 173.
Has the dam burst? I would kind of worry to some extent it has. I mean, there's talk about triage, but obviously, we've canceled a lot of elective surgeries, and I think that would be the sign that maybe the canary has died.
Healthcare workers are doing everything they can to avoid triage protocols. Nobody wants to get to a point where a panel makes decisions on who will live and die. But with space inside the province waning, Alberta has asked the military to help.
Our planning includes a potential aeromedical evacuation capability from the Canadian Armed Forces, including getting more personnel skilled in patient management and transfers that can help support relocating patients to hospitals outside of the province if needed.
The Alberta government has been heavily criticized by the medical community for acting too late to control the Delta-fueled fourth wave. But within Jason Kenney's government, there has also been fierce opposition to the province taking any action at all.
These different factions don't seem to be able to agree on very much with respect to COVID management policy, but they do seem to agree that Jason Kenney should be gone.
On Wednesday, the Alberta Government Caucus met to discuss Kenney's leadership through the COVID crisis. The Premier has said he will be accountable to his party when there is a leadership review. But when? And if Kenney loses the support of the party, who would take over?
There are people that are concerned if Jason Kenney isn't at the helm, vaccine passports and restrictions and federal help may all be in jeopardy.
Political chaos behind the largest public health crisis Alberta has ever seen, one that has killed more than 200 people in the last 3 weeks alone, and there is still no sign the fourth wave here has reached its peak. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
COVID case counts are on the decline in Ontario, and Premier Doug Ford hopes to keep it that way. The new vaccine passport system came into effect there today. People have to prove their vaccination status to enter public places such as restaurants, bars, gyms, and movie theaters. The Premier, who initially opposed vaccine passports, now says they're the best way to avoid another lockdown. Jamie Mauracher reports.
Flashing vaccine credentials for a cup of joe. It's now just another part of the morning routine for many Ontarians.
I'm willing to do it if it helps to, reduce the number of sick people and help to get back to normal faster.
But for some business owners, the province's vaccine passport program is slowing things down.
And obviously all it really takes is a couple people to have to search through their whole email inbox before the line gets really backed up.
Ontario's government has plans to launch an app for employers to quickly scan vaccine information through a QR code, but it won't be ready until late October. Right now, a PDF copy has to be downloaded off the provincial portal to print or store on your phone.
We should have already had the passport and been ready for the first day.
Online, the scramble to access vaccination records caused the system to crash.
And what I'm asking this Premier to do is fix the holes in his vaccine certificate program.
Ontario's official opposition also has concerns around enforcement and retailers such as malls being left off the mandates list. At Toronto's St. Lawrence Market, where you can typically shop and enjoy a meal, tables were blocked off.
We were told somehow that because they were not checking for the vaccine passports, it was more prudent not to eat inside.
Premier Doug Ford says he followed cues from Ontario's top doctor on where proof of vaccination would help most. Still sore about having to enact the policy at all, he doesn't plan on vax passports lasting forever.
But I don't want to do it a day longer than we have to.
But he isn't ready to announce an end date. For employers and Canadians across so many provinces, like with so much in this pandemic, it means being flexible.
It's not invasive to care about the people that you're, putting at risk.
A means to an end to get more people vaccinated and keep those who can't safe. Jamie Mauracher, Global News, Toronto.
New Brunswick's vaccine passport system also took effect this morning. Full vaccination is now required for anyone 12 and older who wants to eat inside a restaurant or get into nightclubs, gyms, and other non-essential venues. Masks are also mandatory in all public indoor spaces, and anyone entering New Brunswick must now pre-register with the province. Canada will begin allowing direct flights from India again, starting on Monday. The ban on direct commercial and private passenger flights expires September 26th. Travelers will need to have a negative COVID test result taken within 18 hours of departure from India. The flight ban was put in place in April because of the rapid spread of the Delta variant. The rate of daily new cases in India has declined by 92% since then. Now, to the aftermath of the federal election, the Liberals will form a minority government despite receiving a smaller percentage of the popular vote than the Conservatives. The popular vote is worth looking into. The People's Party of Canada, for example, didn't win any seats, but an estimated 820,000 Canadians voted for them. That's 5% of the popular vote and more than twice the number who voted for the Green Party. The PPC finished second in 8 ridings, and as our chief political correspondent David Akin explains, their support came from both the right and the left.
Angry protesters at Justin Trudeau rallies, many from the People's Party of Canada, or the PPC. And Conservatives were clearly worried the PPC was stealing their votes.
Justin Trudeau wants you to split the vote by voting PPC. He wants you to let him get away with it.
The Conservatives did bleed some support to the PPC, but not as much as you might think.
It's not necessarily fair to say that all of the votes that were gathered by the PPC would have been Conservative votes.
Indeed, internal Conservative polls said as many as 25% of PPC voters this year cast a ballot in 2019 for the Green Party. And like many Green voters, the PPC vote was seen as a protest vote.
There's a significant number of people who are voting for the People's Party this time around, just as there is for the Greens, who are really none of the above voters.
So it's really an odd coalition of different types of voters, not all of whom would have ended up voting Conservative.
The PPC platform this year was the same as 2019, anti-immigrant, anti-foreign aid, anti-CBC, and so on. But the galvanizing force this year was opposition to public health restrictions, and their target was not just Justin Trudeau, but anyone in power.
We have seen anti-vaccine, anti-mask, anti-COVID restrictions for a year and a half across this province against all elected leaders, against Doug Ford, against Jason Kenney, against Brian Pallister.
There's a bit of an anti-system, anti-institutional vote going on there that wouldn't have necessarily come out for the Conservatives, particularly this time around.
The big question for the country's political class, if there was no pandemic, would 800,000 Canadians have voted for the PPC? Pollsters and political scientists say probably not. But so long as there are public health restrictions, expect those who object to those restrictions to find their political voice in movements like the PPC. Donna?
Okay, David Akin in Ottawa, thank you. The driver of a transit bus involved in a fatal crash in Ottawa 2 years ago has been found not guilty of all criminal charges. Aissatou Diallo was charged with 3 counts of dangerous driving causing death and 35 counts of dangerous driving causing bodily harm. She was behind the wheel of a double-decker transit bus that slammed into the metal awning of a bus station in January 2019. 3 people were killed, dozens of others severely injured. In his ruling, Justice Matthew Weber said Diallo's driving merited scrutiny, but said the setting sun was an obvious hazard at the time, and there was an errant marking on the road that led her directly into a snow-filled gutter. He called the case tragic and acknowledged the degree of human pain and loss. On the Canary Islands, coming up, the volcanic lava swallowing up homes, and disturbing allegations about how U.S. border agents treated Haitian migrants. The U.S. government is promising a swift investigation into what appears to be mistreatment of Haitian migrants along its border with Mexico. Border agents on horseback chased people down, and a warning, some of the images are disturbing. The video shows Border Patrol agents chasing migrants and using the reins of their horses to whip some of them, trying to stop them from crossing the Rio Grande into Texas. Up to 14,000 Haitians hoping to seek asylum in the U.S. are camped near the border, where there's little food and water and temperatures have reached 40 degrees Celsius.
The images that emanated from Del Rio, Texas, over the last several days, and correctly and necessarily were met with our nation's horror, because they do not reflect who we are as a country. We are addressing this with tremendous speed and with tremendous force.
Earlier this week, the Biden administration began deporting hundreds of migrants to Haiti. Many of them have not lived in their home country for years, and they're returning to turmoil. Haiti is recovering from a devastating earthquake last month and the political crisis after the assassination of its president in July. The U.S. President Joe Biden is calling on wealthy nations to do more to respond to the pandemic.
We're not going to solve this crisis with half measures or middle-of-the-road ambitions. We need to go big, and we need to do our part.
At a virtual COVID-19 summit today, he pledged the U.S. would share 1 billion Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine doses. The goal is to vaccinate 70% of the global population within the next year. But in America itself, where vaccination rates have stalled in some states, an average of 2,000 people a day are now dying. Jackson Prosco reports.
It didn't have to be like this. The worst days of the pandemic, more patients and more deaths arriving after vaccines became available.
We've been shouting from the rooftops for a long time now how bad this is and what this can do. And to watch it, despite your warnings and your pleadings, to just come through and take life like it does, that's hard.
In state after state, doctors and nurses are stretched to the breaking point. Some have no beds left to offer. Others have run out of nurses to staff them.
It's estimated that there were an additional 300,000 hospitalizations in the U.S. this summer that were totally preventable if more people had been vaccinated.
Facing the overwhelming surge, hospitals in states like Idaho are prepared to ration care, using crisis standards to decide who gets treatment. Even non-COVID patients may find there are no beds available if they need them.
We've heard stories about heart attack patients from Texas being flown eventually to Sacramento, California to get care.
More Americans have now died from COVID than the 1918 flu pandemic. 679,000 marked at this haunting memorial in Washington. The U.S. has become a cautionary tale.
This is an all-hands-on-deck crisis.
but is trying to serve as a global example. During a vaccine summit with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and other leaders, President Joe Biden announced a plan to ship 1.1 billion doses to low-income countries that are desperate for the vaccines so many Americans seem to take for granted.
For every one shot we've administered to date in America, we have now committed to do 3 shots to the rest of the world.
At the same time, the U.S. is weighing whether to give more doses to Americans. On Thursday, the CDC will decide on booster shots, potentially offering a 3rd dose at a time when many are still rejecting their first. Donna?
Jackson Prosco in Washington, thank you. The UK is reportedly considering trying to join the existing trade deal between Canada, Mexico, and the United States. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson admitted today the trade deal he promised with the U.S. is off the table for now. Johnson is in Washington meeting with U.S. President Joe Biden and other congressional leaders.
The Biden administration is not doing free trade deals around the world right now, but I've got absolutely every confidence that a great deal is there to be done, and there are plenty of people in that building behind me who certainly want to do one.
The UK already has trade deals of its own with Mexico and Canada, and back in 2017, Johnson said the UK would be first in line for a post-Brexit trade deal with the United States. Under Taliban rule, still ahead, a former Afghan governor fears for the future of women in her country.
You're watching Global National.
A volcanic eruption has thousands of people on the move in Spain's Canary Islands. Walls of molten lava have swallowed nearly 200 homes since the Combre Vella volcano erupted on Sunday, the first time it's come to life in 50 years. Residents on the island of La Palma are scrambling to pack up their belongings and leave. There are also concerns all that molten lava could release dangerous gases once it reaches the Atlantic Ocean. Scientists warn the eruption could continue for weeks or even months. Australia's second largest city has been hit by a powerful earthquake. Several buildings in Melbourne were damaged and power lines came down onto the street. The magnitude 5.9 quake, one of the country's strongest on record, struck northeast of the city. Tremors were felt, though, as far north as Sydney. There are no reports of serious injuries.
Very passionate. I've just been struck in the back of a head.
And that's an Australian journalist who got caught up in violent demonstrations against pandemic restrictions and vaccination rules in Melbourne. Thousands of people faced off with riot police. Protesters are angry about lockdown measures and a new vaccine mandate that requires construction workers to show proof of at least 1 dose by Thursday. More than 200 people were arrested. It is the 3rd consecutive day of demonstrations there. In Afghanistan, the worst fears are coming true for women and girls. Girls aged 12 and up are no longer allowed to go to school. Most women are prevented from going to work. The Ministry of Women's Affairs has been abolished by the Taliban, and women have no voice in the new government. Our Crystal Goomansingh spoke with a woman who once served as a governor in Afghanistan about what lies ahead.
This is really unfortunate, and I am the live witness.
Habiba Sarabi has lived through all of the twists and turns of Afghanistan's turbulent history. She served as a minister under former Afghan President Hamid Karzai and was appointed the country's first female governor. She also remembers what it was like when the Taliban was first in power in 1996, and she wasn't allowed at the table.
I couldn't stay in Kabul. That I thought that maybe my children will be out of education and my daughter will be illiterate. So I went to Pakistan as an immigrant.
Once again, those who are able are seeking refuge across the border in Pakistan. Sarabi eventually returned to her country in 2001 and was able to help transform her community. But now she fears the younger generation will find it even harder than she did because their ambitions are so much greater.
For example, my daughter, that on the first time that when Taliban came, she was on the 5th grade. Now she is with 2 master's degrees. The other my son is medical doctor. The other one is the architecture. How they can accept that Taliban could push them back to stay at home, do nothing.
The Taliban has said that women can work, just not anywhere men are present.
We have fought for almost 40 years to bring a Sharia law system in our government. Sharia law does not allow women and men get together or sit together under one roof.
Women face increasing restrictions.
The United Nations Chief of Human Rights recently expressed concern that the Taliban's stated commitments aren't matching realities on the ground. Getting the new government to uphold international treaties, says Sarabi, will be up to countries such as Qatar, Iran, and Pakistan because they have clout with the Taliban.
To be honest, we have gone back 50 years. 50 years.
Speaking to Global News from her home in Turkey, Sarabi says the road ahead will be a test of strength, especially for young people in large cities who have grown up with Western freedoms. Crystal Goomansingh, Global News, London.
Well, kids grow up fast, but this is off the charts. Next, meet the world's tallest teen. This teenager from Montreal is reaching new heights. His name is Olivier Ryu, and it's impossible to miss him on the basketball court or anywhere, really. At age 15, he is a little over 7 feet 5 inches tall. He towers over his whole family, and his shoe size is 20. Is that even a thing? His height has earned him a place in the Guinness Book of World Records as the tallest male teen in the world, something he says he was aspiring to since he was little.
I see a page that is the tallest teenager, and he wasn't tall as me, so I was like, oh, maybe I can get it, and I get it.
He says his next dream is to play in the NBA. I'm sure you've got their attention, Olivier. That is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Air Canada is this gaggle of geese invading a downtown Vancouver intersection. We'd love to see your Canada. Please email it to us, and thanks for watching. Farah Nasser will be here tomorrow, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.